You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
Welcome back to High Net Purpose. Today, we're changing gears as we sit down with one of our favorite purpose-driven businesses. We've got the entrepreneurs, Dave and Steve Flynn from the Happy Pear, joining us to give the story of how they've built a business in 2004 that started off with a simple mission to get people to eat more plant-based food. Over the last 20 years, they've taken that business to having almost 2 million strong online followers. They've got a vertically integrated operation going from farm to fork with regenerative farming and food production. They've also written 4 vegan recipe books, which have become international bestsellers. In this wide-ranging conversation, we talk to the Happy Pear about how they've built a business that's had to stay true to its integrity and values, whilst at the same time scaling in the food industry. They also talk about technology and social media and how it's integral to their business, but also something they need to manage within their own lives and families. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Happy Pear episode of High Net Purpose. Dave and Steve, welcome to High Net Purpose. So for anyone watching on YouTube, the green t-shirt is
Dave.
And the black t-shirt,
Stefan.
Welcome to London as well. So Dublin, Greystone's been missing a couple of swimmers this morning, but you managed to get some swimming in?
Yeah. This morning we ran up to Hampstead Heath and had a swim with a friend up there in a chocolate tasting, and it was glorious. Spencer runs a cool chocolate, craft chocolate company called Cocoa Runners, and he's like chocolate absolute enthusiast. And we had a great time sitting by the pond tasting chocolate. So at 7:30 a.m. we were tasting chocolate.
Up on Hampstead Heath.
Hampstead Heath, and then we ran back, which was great fun.
Well, you do make the most of things. It's great.
Yeah, it was glorious.
Welcome to High Net Purpose. I'm really glad that we managed to make this work on your trip when you were in town. Can we jump in and ask, have you managed to articulate your purpose?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've had the purpose right since the start, which has been to help people to eat more veg, which sounds really simple and basic, but that's what we've been doing for coming up to 20 years now. And it started with a vegetable shop. So we were 24. We started with a vegetable shop in our hometown of Greystones. And it was kind of large. We tend to pitter patter. And it was kind of, we had changed our diet and lifestyle so much. We grew up in a little town called Greystones. You'd be familiar with it. And eating a standard Irish diet, meat and 2 veg, burgers and chips, pizzas, and a load of pints at the weekend. You know, and we played a lot of rugby. So we kind of hung around in these macho circles where you were kind of always trying to prove yourself. But being identical twins, hyper competitive, we tended to be overachievers. Just because that's your nature. You'd been competing for your mother and your father's love and attention every day of your life. So you're always looking for external ways to get attention. So by the time we ended up going studying business, and the subtext of business, if you make loads of money, then you've won, then you're going to be happy, then you've got more status, you've won, you're successful. And we'd kind of bought into that at the start of college. But by the time it got to the end of it, we just didn't believe it anymore. So we went away traveling separately on our quintessential Jack Kerouac type trips. And we came back, we ended up giving up alcohol, we ended up starting eating plant-based, and, you know, this whole journey into food and how food really impacts, you know, every aspect of life. And we ended up coming back at age 24, starting a vegetable shop, as I said, to bring it back whole circle, to help people to eat more veg. And when we started first, it was largely like, I remember I was on Corsica. I did a 7-day water fast. I was up the top of the island on my own, going through a little bit of purgatory, you know, and that sitting there in the heat and just drinking water. And I remember feeling like it was like, I want to I remember phoning you up afterwards, like, Dave, like I want to start like a food revolution. And you thought, like, revolution, we were going to be burning stuff and breaking stuff, and it was going to be real, you know.
Rebel Alliance.
But it was like, you want to start a veg shop?
Yeah. So from the veg
shop to the scale of what you've got today? Can you give us just the highlights of what were the breakthrough bits?
So it's gone from the veg. As we said, the purpose is to help people to eat more veg. And anyone listening might go, eat more veg, and you start a vegetable shop. What am I listening to this for? But I guess it's gone from, we've been at this for 20 years. Now we've got 3 main revenue streams. Like we've got the retail outlet, where we've got 2 farms supporting that. We have our products business. Where
And
we
what's
sell,
the retail outlet?
So the retail outlet, we have a shop, cafe, and a sourdough bakery.
And a coffee roast.
And a coffee roaster. And we've got a couple of farms that support that, Regenerative Organic Farm and a Sprout Farm. And then we've got a products business where we've sold about 15 to 18 million food products. And then we've got our media side of the business where we've sold 500,000 cookbooks. We've had more than 100,000 people, members that have joined our app and platform. And we do a lot of, we have our own podcast and social media outlets and TV stuff.
And you're in that sort of global group of the sort of Rich Rolls and Dan Buettners in the UK, Joe Wicks and Jamie Oliver. That sort of becomes sort of the group globally that you've been sort of in. How do you keep a sort of woo-woo filter on all the stuff that's coming through? Because looking at the podcasts that you've done, you've had a real range. Do you just remain open-minded, or you got to filter some of the stuff out?
I think it's coming back to, like, obviously the world is the world we live in, where media kind of drives a lot of attention and people are looking for the next kind of hack type thing, or the next thing is going to get headlines or get views or get followers or whatnot. You've got to consistently come back to what's important for us. And our mission has been very much integral since the start. It's not about making anyone vegan or vegetarian, but it's about getting people to eat more plant-based, because in a world where 60% of calories are the average person eats are ultra processed foods. And, there's such a rise in processed foods across the world that getting people to eat more veg is such a ubiquitous mission. Like, no one will contest that and go, that's crap, that's a load of crap. So we've had to really learn that, stay in our lane. Our lane has been about food. And Steve wants to say something.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, and in terms of the woo-woo filter, I think, like, ultimately it's about finding things that we're interested in, because, like, you can be busy trying to be popular, but then you forget who you are. And I think that's part of the challenge with media and social media, is that the nature of it is people want high engagement, and, you can forget what it is that you got into it. So I think for us, it's always, like, often with social media, myself, Kiva, manages our social media, and the pair of us will work on it together. And some videos will get like 5 million, 10 million views, and you're like, we're kicking ass, we're so popular this week. And then next week they're getting like 50 or 100,000. You're like, what's happening? Why are we not popular? And you have to keep going to Kiva. I would regularly say to Kiva, listen, it's not about popularity, it's about doing good art, and it's about sticking to what we believe in and just being consistent with that. And some days it's going to be sunny, some days it's going to rain, and that's cool. And that's part of the process.
Because how do you think about success?
I guess the mission, like, ultimately we could strive and burn ourselves out by getting billions of people to eat more veg, and we could quantify it and say, we've helped 500 billion people eat more veg, and we could quantify it with metrics like this.
Or we could say we turned over 100 billion last year and we made a profit of this.
So there's many ways to measure it, but ultimately for ourselves, it ultimately starts, each person's only journey starts with ourselves. So how am I embodying this mission? How am I in terms of, like, part of our mission, I said it was eating more veg, but when we originally started, it was to build a happier, healthier world and to build community around that. So that was kind of what it was. And that ultimately comes back to ourselves and go, well, am I prioritizing time with my family? Am I relaxed and at ease most of the time rather than stressed and uptight? Because therefore I will make better decisions. I will be a better leader. I will be a better example. I will be a better husband. I will be a better father. I'll be a better friend, a better son, and all these various things. I can give an example here. Back when we were, back 2009, we had a sprout business. We were growing sprouts. It was the start of our food business. We were growing microgreens and sprouts and selling them to local stores. Our brother Dara ran it. And in 2009, there was an outbreak of E. coli in Germany, and it was believed to come from sprouts. So the sprout market overnight fell over. And we were selling only to local independent stores. So our brother's business, the Sprout Farm, which was part of the Happy Pear business, had overnight there was nothing to sell. No one would buy them. So at the time, Steve had a great pesto recipe. He was making sun-dried tomato pesto, and Mom used to make it once a week, and we'd sell it through our shop. And Dara was looking for something to sell because no one would buy sprouts. So as one business was failing, you kind of go, well, why don't we try sell pesto? So we tried selling pesto, and lo and behold, we've sold probably 8 million units since that one failure turned into something else. So I'm just giving an example here that sometimes, whereas we might have gone, oh my God, sprouts aren't selling, this is so annoying, we're such failures. But then if you sit in the discomfort of it and kind of go through this process, these other ideas emerge, and sometimes you can say, I had a great idea, but ultimately these ideas are there and they unfold.
It's more of a Stoic philosophy of...
Yeah, I think it's kind of gone that, you look at many millionaires or billionaires or people who are super successful, and ultimately my version of success is much more about happiness and being integrated and being aligned and feeling like I'm contributing to my community and being of service.
So as you've scaled up and started to sell SKUs to supermarkets and stuff, how have you managed to keep your values and integrity, but then sort of facing into that sort of larger...
I think it's a challenge. I think there's always a constant trade-off, like scale and integrity don't always go perfectly together. Like to scale, like now we have about we've about 80 different products, from pestos to sprouts to pizzas to plant-based sausages to burgers to granolas there's a broad range. I think we're in 11 different categories. And as we have scaled, typically there has to be volume built into it. And, ideally you want to create the most wonderful place to work. But ultimately when you're making pesto, it's like 10 people in packing it and you're managing a line, and it's hard to create everyone singing together and going, this is wonderful, we're putting the tubs in the pesto today, woo! But ultimately, like, they're putting tubs in pesto, and it's not necessarily. But there's probably the longest people have worked with us are people in pesto,
doing kind of just repetitive type work. And then I would also say that ideally, like as we say, you always, when you're creating a new product, you've got to look at the volumes. Is there enough scale in this that this can be profitable, and will this impact people? And it's a constant compromise, because ideally you'd be using local organic ingredients, the best quality, but also you're balancing that with what price will the customer pay. And you want to have a compostable packaging, but that compostable typically ends up in the recycling bin, so it doesn't actually benefit the whole process. So we're currently using recycled packaging.
And like, for example,
there's constant compromises right across the thing.
The confines of capitalism often restrict the ideal we've ever done in farming. Nowadays in modern day society isn't celebrated. It's seen like, what are you doing getting into farming? But through doing it, ultimately, like, to give a little spiel on farming, I think ultimately nowadays we celebrate tech, we celebrate finance, we celebrate farm, we celebrate big things. But ultimately we forget that, there was good research in the 1980s. It was done about the 50s of the US, when, as soil started to degrade around the Midwest of the US, economic prosperity declined, education declined, economic money, in essence, or the wealth of the people declined massively. So as soil declines, typically we as a species decline. And nowadays we're growing much more food through chemicals or conventional agriculture, even though in essence it's, spraying pesticides, herbicides, fungicides and artificial fertilizers. And as a result, the plants don't develop such deep roots. And as a result, we as a species have become quite caught up in the aesthetic, overly style over substance.
Now that's quite a rant, making the link between what we're eating nowadays and our culture at large. Like, it's a very broad brush statement that may be applicable, may not be. But certainly food, what we eat, when you look at nowadays, what the average person is eating. We were discussing here, coming in here, about the 10 most purchased items in supermarkets in the UK, I think it was. And most of them were,
I think it was
energy drinks. It was energy drinks, it was alcohol, it was white bread, it was highly processed foods. Whereas ultimately, if you look at the longest living people in the planet, if you look to the blue zones, 5 areas in the planet where there's some of the longest living people, which Dan Buettner, who you mentioned, was one of the founders of this, 95% plus of what they eat is whole plant foods, which is your fruit, your veg, your beans, your whole grains, and your nuts and seeds. So farming for us is for ourselves. It starts off with selfish kind of desire to connect ourselves to the land, connect our families to food, local food, which can nourish ourselves, and try to make us more whole,
And I guess in selling to the supermarkets, there's just a realization of, like, this isn't perfect, but this is much better than the alternative of where we are now.
Ultimately, the goal of our product business is to make healthier options more widely available.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're not perfect, but no one's perfect. And I think part of life is about embracing the imperfections.
So you guys are masters at using the various channels. You've had highly successful books published by Penguin. You do all your influencing online, etc., and you sort of live what you say. What would you advise to people that are looking to bring more purpose into their businesses and entrepreneurs who are looking to make that next step from where they are today?
I think it starts with the personal. I think it's each person has to start with themselves, because it's very easy to sit there and you've built a business, but it's been highly stressful. You've stressed out loads of people. You've fired people. You've created a negative ripple energetically, but you've got more money in your bank. You might have a fancy car and a fancy house and these type of things, but you might be dissatisfied. So I think it starts with each person in themselves and making peace with themselves, becoming more integrated and aligned with themselves.
What does that mean?
Their own values. Say if their purpose is to, say for example, Islandbridge Capital is about creating more, purposeful venture. It's investing in more purpose-based companies. So that would start with each person as their individual going, well, what are my values? A lot of people say, well, family is the most important thing to them. But then if you look at how they spend their time, they spend 2 hours on a Saturday with their family. They work most of the week, Monday to Friday, and they spend very little time in their family. Whereas to really become the embodiment of your values, you kind of need to look at what's important and how am I applying my time to this. So I think it starts with each person. And there's that aspect of, reflecting on how you're spending your time. And I think there has to be oftentimes there is these coming to Jesus moments where nowadays a lot of people, it comes when they get sick. They get sick or someone dies.
Or they have a breakdown.
They have a breakdown or a burnout. There's these kind of moments which make people reflect and go, oh my God, I'm so out of alignment here. I'm a workaholic that drinks way too much alcohol. My health I've completely neglected. And oh my God, it's taken this massive event to make me aware of this. But I think each person in every moment and every day can go, well, why don't I take time out? Like I'm working so hard, or maybe my purpose is completely misaligned. Maybe I'm in a career that doesn't fulfill me. Maybe I'm much more suited to helping children or working in a school, or maybe it doesn't have to be a status-based job. It could be something else that feels like it's more purpose-based for each person as an individual.
So it starts with the psychology of the leader influencing the company, if that's where it's trying to change what it's doing.
Yeah, I think it starts with each person as the individual. It has to start with the individual, and then it goes from there.
I 100% agree. And because I do, even the biggest firms, the psychology of the leader, you can see it all the way through the companies and what they do and the direction they go. So I would totally agree with that approach.
I think it's ultimately like this human experience, and I guess we tend to camp out in philosophy quite a bit, but it's modern society will espouse these values of success equals money, or it equals fame, or it equals power. But ultimately it's like, how comfortable are you sitting on your own? How comfortable are you sitting through the difficult times in life and just understand they're going to pass? And I think as leaders, often we pursue to be a leader in a business because you want money, or you want fame, or you want power. Often these are the motives. But if it's a purpose-driven company, it's about wanting to have change, and it's at the expense of wealth. And typically, if you're a purpose-driven business, you can obviously run a successful business monetary, but typically the purpose is greater than the monetary. At least that's in the Happy Pear, for example. There's been times when you're turning 10 million, you're turning over more at this, but there's a constant duality or fight between profit and the ideals, and capitalism and perfection. And that's the constant. It's like walking. There's left foot, right foot. There's the male and female, or the night and day. And it's this constant conflict and the duality, which is hard. But once you get it right, there's a beauty in it.
When you look at purpose-driven business, it tends to be that they've managed to crack something on the culture side, which means they retain the best talent, they attract the right customers, and they end up building more sustainable businesses longer term.
That all sounds great, but it's really hard. It's really challenging. I certainly don't want to play down that, we're all sold these stories of the Airbnbs and the Ubers that have created these massively successful, or the Instagrams or whatever, that have flipped their company and done X, Y, Z, but it's extremely challenging. We've been at this 20 years, and you need to be the purpose bit is so important to sticking it out.
This business wasn't for personal wealth. It was literally to try to change the world. And when we started at first, I remember we used to measure success by the vibe. I remember we'd go to meet Polly the accountant every year, and you'd have to sign the books. And I remember a few years in, Polly and Dad were like, we're going to have to appoint a manager, someone to actually run this company, because you're not responsible. And although we had a degree, and you had a degree in finance, I had a degree and a master's in business, we had somewhat thrown it out through there was that duality of capitalism, as in pursuit of profit, or else the ideals. And we had pursued the ideals far too much at the expense of the responsibility of running a business. And it's literally only 15 years into the business that we realized shit, we're within capitalism here. To run a business responsibly, we need to make a profit so we can reinvest and we can grow this business and expand our mission. But it's taken us, it's a slow conflict. It's a slow one.
So it's one of these classics of 15 years and then overnight success. Right, but it's been, you guys have been quite humble in explaining. And you've created a phenomenal business and over 1 million people in your community, and maybe that's where we should go next. When we did the climate scenarios event a couple of weeks ago here in London, Dave, you contributed some video to it that we played on the second day, and you know the scenario workshop. A lot of people, you know, were focusing on a lot of the big macro stuff in climate, and the video that you recorded was quite impactful, very impactful in that you sort of focused on local and who's around you and the community that's there and the importance of that, even though climate, of course, is such a global thing, but it's starting within your community. And it ended up forming one of the first principles that we had at the end of that. And I think that insert from you talking about it changed the minds of the people and the optic that they were looking at around it. Can you give us some of the background about how you think about community and even if it's talking about what you do in your life with your local community in Greystones?
Yeah, so I think community is, and maybe I'll just give a context to this. I'll go off in loads of different ways, and we'll hopefully wrap it around. But I mentioned there the blue zones. So the blue zones, I'll just say it again, it's the 5 areas in the planet where there's the most amount of people that live over the age of 100. So most amount of centenarians, small little places, one in Okinawa in Japan, one Nicoria in Greece, one in Sardinia, a place in Okinawa or a place in Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and a Loma Linda in California. So
and soon one in Greystones in Dublin, right?
Who knows? Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
Depends. Not in our control. But 5 places in the world was the people who live the longest, healthiest lives, and there's many principles, and researchers went in to wonder, well, what do these people do? Is it just genetics, or how do they live their lives? And they worked it down to 9 lifestyle factors, and one of them was food, where there's a serious plant slant, and there was faith, and there was all sorts of principles. But there was one linchpin. There was one most important principle for a long, happy life, and that's community. That's community and relationships. And what I'm saying here is not new to anyone. And goes, oh yeah, of course, yeah, relationships. You know, real wealth is your relationships. And same again, you look at, there was Bonnie, what was her name? I think it was Bonnie something or other. Anyway, she was a palliative care nurse in Australia, and she wrote a book on the top 5 regrets of dying. So a palliative care nurse, obviously, you know, helped people transition, and they, you know, help people to minimize pain on their way to death. And she reflects on the top 5 regrets of them dying. And one of them is, I wish I'd let myself be happy. I wish I had prioritized my family more. I wish I had prioritized my friendships. You know, they were simple, basic, everyday things. And it's a bit back to what you were saying there in terms of like, what is success? And for us, I think community is so important. When we started back in 2004, there was no social media. So our impact was very much community based. It was very much right from the start. We used to go to local schools and we'd do talks. We'd make smoothies. We'd go to the local bridge club. We'd go to the local pensioners, and we'd be heralding eating more vegetables, and we'd be extraordinarily enthusiastic, and we'd do cooking demos. And then it rolled on to where we started doing, we were doing cooking demos, and one day, it was probably 2008. I'm going way off topic here now, but this is more stories. Yeah, 2008, we're doing cooking demos, and I was in the shop, and Steve was working in the kitchen. And I remember a lady came into the veg shop, Mary Cahill, and she said to me, "Jesus, lads, I've lost 4 stone on Weight Watchers." I was like, "Geez, that's brilliant. Well done, Mary. Fair play." And Steve came out, and we were chatting away anyway. And Mary headed off, and Steve said to me, "Geez, I wonder, like, you know, the way we're doing those cooking classes, I wonder, could we come up with a health course, like a course where people could measure the improvement in their health?" And I was reading a book by this doctor, Dr. Dean Ornish. He had showed in the 1991 Lifestyle Heart Trial, a clinical trial that you could reverse. He had reversed the indicators in 83% of people, reversed the indicators for heart disease by putting people on a plant-based diet. So Steve said, "I wonder, you know, the book you're reading, I wonder, would that work in Ireland, in Greystones, with local people?" So it was like, geez, brilliant. So with no social media, so we decided to print out posters and put them on lampposts. of saying reverse heart disease, skinny, sexy, delicious, 4-week plan. And we realised we needed a nurse. So we called down to the local doctors, we knock on his door and we say, how are you, Brian? We're the lads in the Happy Pear. Yeah, we're the twins. Do you know a nurse? We're looking for a nurse. And he said, geez, Angela's in, you're lucky. So we call on Angela's door and we go, how are you, Angela? We want to reverse heart disease in 4 weeks and we need a nurse to help us measure people's measurements at the start and at the end. And we said, are you in? And we were expecting that she'd go, oh my God, what an opportunity. But
How much are you going to pay us,
Yeah,
lads?
she stood there with her arms crossed. She said, how much are you going to pay us? And we said, 50 quid. And she said, all right, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, cool. So we, as we said, we put the posters up on the lampposts. And the next thing with the most amount of reach was the parish bulletin. So we took an ad in the local parish bulletin.
That's the church for anyone who doesn't know what the parish is.
And we put reverse heart disease 4-week plan starting whenever it was.
Skinny, sexy, free.
Yeah.
So it was free. It was an experiment.
And we had 20 people sign up and they came along the first night and Angela the nurse measured people's cholesterol, weight and blood pressure down the back of the shop. And these were local people from the local community, meat and 2 veg people. And they came upstairs and sure, they had the idea that sure, at least it'd be funny. Those 2 lads are, they mightn't agreed with us, but it'll probably be entertaining. So they're all sitting there with their arms crossed and we kind of say, well, we're going to put you on a 4-week plan of eating more veg and whole foods and blue zones, and we talk about all this kind of stuff. And we pass around lots of dishes and they taste and they go, geez, that's not bad. What's that? Those are lentils. Oh my God, I didn't know you could eat lentils. I thought they were just ornamental. Wow, okay, brilliant. And we're getting them to eat dals and chilies and pad thais and they're like, that's not bad. Okay, cool. So we put them on a 4-week plan of eating plant-based foods, so based around whole foods. And at the end of the 4 weeks, Angela came back and measured people's cholesterol again. And amazingly, there was an average drop of cholesterol of 20% across the 20 people, which was better than statins. Blood pressure regulated in most people. Average person lost 3 kilos in weight. And there was 2 blind people who did it and unbelievably they were able to see. It was just amazing. Okay, that was just to see if you were listening. But yeah, that was we started community things like this.
And then you took these courses online.
Community has always been, like, it started off very local, but now since social media, it's become a global community, which is the challenge because there's the local, which we started with, and we still have the same store in the same town or hometown. But now you're balancing this with this global community of people all over the world with similar values.
I think community is one of the most important things with life. I think, nowadays we're more isolated than ever. Social media allows us to connect in so many different ways and phones do, but ultimately we're more lonely than we are as a species. I imagine
lonely than ever.
And I think many people listening here probably don't know their neighbours. And like, even if I reflect on myself growing up in the 80s in Ireland, you used to just call into the neighbours and just walk in and you'd have a cup of tea and you'd have a chat and you knew all your neighbours and you kind of supported each other because you needed that resilience. And when you call in and get a bit of sugar, we're out of milk, will you call in next door and get it, or this type of thing? And it's like, nowadays we don't even know our neighbours. And I think the true success or the true value in life is that we evolved in the plains of the Sahara or, Africa, and we survived not because we were the biggest, the strongest or the faster. We survived because we could coordinate together, we could work together. And it was this collective coordination of the tribe that allowed us to proliferate, if you will. And it was only natural when we became isolated on our own. We were nervous, anxious, depressed because something was going to come and eat us. And we weren't strong enough or quick enough to get away from it. So, I think community is one of the true wealths of life. And even just to articulate that in a better story, we grew up in Greystones, as we said, and when you start a vegetable shop, you're kind of going the opposite way to technology. And I remember about 5 years into the Happy Pear, I remember we got a letter, so this is pre-email really, we got a letter from the Web Summit saying, would we be interested in making juices and smoothies at an event called the Founders? And I thought, wow. And it was in the Mansion House and we were driving a little red van and we were going to the fruit market every day and we were selling vegetables. And it was like, shit, the Mansion House, I wonder who's in the Mansion. Amazing. Wrote back, yeah, we're in, deadly. And we rocked up and we were in the Mansion House and we set up a little juice bar. And it was an elite event. There was only about 30 people at it. And I remember we were making juices and smoothies for some fella that founded this thing called Skype, didn't know what it was. This fella, Nikolai. And some fella who founded something called Netflix, this fella called Reed, didn't know what Netflix was. Another fella founded something called Twitter, don't know what it was, some fella called Jack. So you met all these heads. And then during the break, you were allowed to go into the talks. And we were listening to the talks and it was like, geez, this technology stuff is kind of sexy. We should get phones. And I remember we finished it and it was like, okay, let's get phones. Let's join Jack's thing called Twitter, I think it was. And at the time we had kids, not together, but we had children separate with our respective wives. And you're trying to get them to sleep. And we were down one morning, Dave couldn't get Elsie asleep and I couldn't get May to sleep. And we were just walking around. The sun was rising. Took a picture, put it up on Twitter, and people seemed to engage with it. Hope, dawn, new day, creativity, nature, all this type of stuff, potential. So we'd kind of go down there regularly, and some days we'd swim and some days we wouldn't. And I remember I was down there one September, gorgeous sunrise. It was one of those ones where there was like dark clouds, and I was down by the cove, and I walked up to the edge of the cove, and there was a fella in swimming, and it was freezing. It was one of those days that looked beautiful on camera, but it was freezing. And he kind of got out, and we went to an all-boys school, so we're very susceptible to male bravado. And he kind of stood there in a tight pair of togs, and he kind of looked at us with his hands on hips and said, "You getting in, lads?" And it was like I banged my chest and went, "Yeah, yeah." You know, even though inside I was going, "I don't want to swim, I don't want to swim." So I got in the sea, and it was freezing, and we came out and we got chatting, and he said his name was Neil, and just as he was leaving, he turned around and went, "See you tomorrow." And we went, "Yeah." And inside I was like, "Oh, shit.
What have I agreed to?"
Yeah, exactly. And we came the next day, and a friend, Caroline, joined us, Caroline Barrington, and we'd grown up. And then we came back again, and an 18-year-old called Hugo was joining, and suddenly there was 5 of us. And then the next day we bought tea, and we didn't know what was happening here, but there was something beautiful happening, and it wasn't the cold immersion therapy that was helping with our oxytocin.
This was 10 or 12 years ago.
This was 10 years ago. And we didn't know how long we were going to do this for, but what was making us come back was the joy and the connection and the community ultimately, because here we were with like Neil, who was maybe 10 years older, and Hugo was maybe 15 years younger, and Caroline was maybe 10 years younger, and typically people that you didn't talk about what they did for a living, and you didn't talk about like economics or politics. You just talked about the sea, and geez, lovely today, and it's freezing, and it was all very like, you could be sitting with a king or a queen or a bin person or a lawyer or a doctor, but when you're standing in a pair of togs, cold and scared of going into sea, you're all equal. There's no social status. So we've been swimming in the sea every day for about 10 years.
At sunrise.
At sunrise. And it's something that we never thought we'd do.
And back to the community thing, that community is kind of expanded out to where there's hundreds of people swim every day on the beach, some at sunrise, some not. But it kind of expanded out to where we started doing events like sunrise, swimrise events. We called it swimrise, where you swim at sunrise. And I guess the first one, I'd say it's probably 8 years ago at this stage, at the early days of Instagram and, Snapchat's journey, where we used to put up photos every day of the sunrise, and people used to always comment and go, "Oh my God, I'd love to join you." But they wouldn't really realise how cold it was, because it looks beautiful in a 2-dimensional picture. So Steve one day, along with Siobhan, who was working, said, "Well, why don't we have a public one? Why don't we invite people to join us?" So it was Tuesday morning. Steve just did a story saying, "Come join us Thursday morning." And it was June, so sunrise was 4:50, I think. So he said, "We're going to meet at the Happy Pear at 4:30 a.m. and we're all going to swim at sunrise." And we put it up. That was Tuesday, and then that was Thursday a.m. and Thursday morning at 4:30 a.m. And we said free porridge, free coffee. That was the big hook. And me and Steve met at 4:15, and we didn't have little pots because it was a commercial kitchen. So we had a big pot. So we said, "Actually, make a big pot of porridge." And sure, they'll probably need Raj and Dara and me and Steve. There might be 6. It was Neil, will probably come, and Caroline. So we made a pot of porridge, made some coffee and tea, and we walk out the front door at 4:30 a.m. There's about 150 people. It was amazing. And we walked down the beach, and we all swam at sunrise. Beautiful moment. We all made love, and it was gorgeous. It was glorious. No, okay, the making love was a joke. But we subsequently did ones where we had 1,000 people and 800, hundreds of people. But then we had to stop doing it because there was, it just...
you needed
insurance, and the liability was too much, and it was costing you tens of thousands to put these things on. And it was like, okay, well... these had their moments when it was exciting and fresh, and now it's...
But you still swim every morning.
We still swim every day at sunrise, and I think the bit that sustained it ultimately is community. And I guess to go back to what is community will sustain you when times are hard. And I think that's something that for anyone who does want to have a long, rich life, and I don't mean monetary, but real rich life, it's ultimately down to the quality of our relationships.
And I guess COVID was a great teacher of that to us.
Yeah.
Who is in your community, who's closest to you, who's gonna help you out when you need it most.
And that's even reflected in nature. If you look at the strongest ecosystems, they're the ones that are the most diverse, where there's the most kind of, it's typically around the edges of nature, where the forest meets the river, the forest meets the field. That's where there's the most amount of diversity, and there's the most amount of strength in terms of an ecosystem. And the same in soil. The more diversity and the more connections the richer the kind of life is within it. So I think it's reflected in nature and it's reflected in humans. The more we are connected, the more we are part of our community, tends to be the greater creativity, the greater joy, the more resilience.
The richer life and society is.
So we'd like to talk about some of the paradoxes and stuff on high net purpose. So your parents.
Great.
And you've talked about mobile phones, you've talked about technology. You've created this very wholesome life for your kids in Dublin, but the mobile phone is there. It's recording. You've got to then put it up online, and then there's other people looking at it online. How do you manage that?
It's a constant balance, and I think ultimately I reflected on myself and how do I feel, and over the years, I've had to navigate, who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for me or am I doing it for that? And often, like, social media can feel like you have this shadow with you all the time. And social media, for me and for most people who do it, if they're really honest, will say it can be quite addictive. And it's often like social media is on extrinsic, approval. You want the approval and people to tell you you're great, and it's euphoric. We all love it. We're hardwired to want the tribe to like us so that at times of need, they will be there to support us. So it's inbuilt in our very DNA. But social media is very different from real life. The way you can't have a million people tapping you on the shoulder or going, well done, great job. It doesn't happen in real life. So it's a difficult one to balance. And it's something, in terms of, to answer your question specifically with my children, and when do I record and when do I not, I often will do things on the way to something and after something, but in the middle for me. Yeah. And it's like, you constantly have to, like, how present can I be within it? And when I'm doing social media, I'm giving my presence. But it's like, there's been years, in the early days, it was like, am I fucking doing this for social media? Am I doing this for me? The way, and it's like, it's constantly, the best indicator is with me and how comfortable I am.
And I'd have it, like, we're identical twins, so I have a very different relationship. A few years ago, I stopped completely. Like, I don't look at social media at all. I rarely do it. Like, I participate in videos and we're publishing content, but I don't consume it because I found it just was slowly rotting me, and I found addictive tendencies towards it. But even back to your question in terms of family life, like, we've got our eldest kids, they're 13, they're teenagers. And Greystones, the town we're from, is the first town in the world that has a voluntary ban on mobile phones in primary schools. So this last year, it was a huge initiative that's got global attention. It's the first town in the world that the principals have all come together, and it's a voluntary, but it's highly adhered to, where there's no mobile phones up in primary school. So
what's a primary school?
Primary school in Ireland is up to the age of 12 before kids go on to secondary school or high school or whatnot. So no mobile phones. And we noticed because our kids are 13. They finished primary school just before this came in. So there was a lot of pressure in 6th class. A lot of kids had mobile phones, and it was bleeding back to 5th class and 4th class. And it was not that my daughter wanted a mobile phone. She just didn't want to be left out. Yeah. She didn't want to feel isolated. So I think as a parent, anyone who's listening, there's that constant, the challenge of, when does your kid get a phone, and do you want them to get a phone, and what do you give them access to social media? How do you manage the whole relationship with it? Because it is a very frightful area.
And I think research is pretty clear that social media, for most people is addictive. It can be, like most tools, it can be extremely positive, but there's a cost to that positivity. And I think with children, there's a lot of peer pressure, and my 13-year-old isn't letting near social media.
Yeah, my daughter has a phone where she's allowed text on it. She's got 55 minutes a day on her phone, and then it cuts off, and I have to approve any extra 15 minutes after that, and there's no social media. 55, yeah. Yeah, that's it. So that's for text or photos or whatnot. So it's very simple, but that's how we manage it. And I find,
and there's no right or wrong.
And a friend has a great expression. He says that it's not really at what age do you want your kid to access the internet, it's what age do you want the internet to access your kid.
You guys are a bit older than me. You're the happy pair. How do you retain being happy into your 40s, and you're getting older, financial pressures, our parents are getting older, and then we've got the backdrop of global conflicts, climate crisis, etc. Have you managed? Have you cracked it? How do you remain the happy pair? Are there not days where you just want to,
Of course,
tell a customer, just go up?
Yeah, I think for number one, like, where from conception, we're identical twins. So we're born with someone that inherently is there for you. So we're in a very fortunate position that is identical twins. And we're those identical twins, as you can see, that finish one of the sentence. So we inherently have someone who's going to support us, which is a real blessing for ourselves.
And someone that, without speaking, can understand what you're feeling.
Yeah. So we're very fortunate in that sense. But lifestyle, I think, is so important, and modern day society, as we've kind of espoused it, there's the subtext of if you make loads of money and if you've got status, those are the most important things. But ultimately, we all live in a body, you know, and a body needs to be looked after in terms of food, in terms of movement, in terms of sleep, in terms of the very basic principles. Yet our society does not really, you know, encourage these things. It does, obviously. People go to the gym and they, you know, all these type of things. But when you look at our own lives, I typically go to bed somewhere between 9 and 10. I get up at 5 or 5:30 every morning. I exercise regularly. I don't drink. You know, I eat a plant-based diet. I drink juice every morning. I'm like, there's a lot of principles here. I have a simple enough life. It's quite a crazy life, actually, most people would say. But it's simple in terms of the same people are there. You know, I've got good relationships. I live right near to all my family and see them most
And
weeks.
I think if you do look to the blue zones, again, just to go back to that same example, the reason why they live such long, successful lives, successful in terms of longevity and in terms of health, is that the healthy choice is the easy choice. And I think that's the key to sustaining health, is that we now live in an obesogenic environment, which is a fancy word, that there are more calories available than we need. And it's an environment that pushes us more towards obesity than it does towards health, because most of those calories are ultra processed. So the more we can create an environment where the healthy choice is the easy choice, the more likely we're going to be healthy. So it's like, can you create an environment where exercise is easy to do, that your friends want to exercise rather than go to the pub and have chips? Can you have friends that you'll support when they're having a shit time and they can support you, and not friends that you just, can I keep talking?
Yeah.
And friends that, like, you don't just share the good times, that you can say, I'm having a shit day, and they can say, yeah, I'm having a shit day too. And you go, oh, great. Oh, that's cool. Like, how can we create an environment that will encourage you to eat more plant-based, not to be vegan or vegetarian, but to eat more fruit and veg and to eat better? And I think these little things over time compound.
Yeah.
Because mental health in males, you know,
In their 40s, typically that's the time when a male typically will feel most loneliest, most isolated, and most moving towards depression.
And yeah, so I guess showing that vulnerability, that it isn't all easy. As the happy pair, how do you communicate
as a happy
that?
pair, like at a personal level, I think it's also to, like, maybe as I get older, I realize that life is more about savoring the little moments, savoring the sunshine in the morning.
We had a moment this morning, and I was so aware of it. It was a moment we'd just swam. We'd ran up, me, Stephen, and Dara, so 3 brothers.
And we left our dad at home in the apartment, so we'd spend the 4 of us having chats, and we jokingly call him Dad the Rhino because he snores so loud. We leave the rhino in his cave.
We were all sleeping in this apartment. It was good crack, you know. There's 3 40-year-old sons and a dad, you know, and then the 3 brothers. We ran up to Hampstead. I was very aware that was a moment, that someday we won't be able to do this. That it was a moment, and we swam, and then we were sitting there on this bench. The sun was coming through these leaves.
We just chatted to Nikki and Tom.
We just met these new people. There was a picnic, there was coffees, and I was so aware, this is a moment. This is a moment. It's going to be February. It's going to be raining. It's going to be cold. The wind's going to be in my face. There's going to be those days, but this is a moment. That was beautiful, and I was so aware of that. That is the wealth.
And I think, like, to go, I guess we keep going philosophical, but often we celebrate the richest person is the person that has the most. But I think the richest person is the person that needs the least. And I think it's, how can we be satisfied with little? And nowadays in society, it's very hard to know when's enough. You know, you get, as I said, monetary people, typically they get 1 million, they want 2 million, they want 2 million, they want 10 million. It's like, there's never enough. And same way where more people are overweight and obese and they're healthy because they don't know when is enough in terms of food. And I think it's something that I struggle, and we all struggle, but when is enough?
This year, like, we've written cookbooks. We've written 6 cookbooks, and we've another one. We've written another one. And I've wanted to move my own writing in a different direction. So this year I committed to one of my goals. So I have very few goals, but one was to write a weekly Happier column. So it's a column which I reflect on what I believe is important for happiness. So I've managed 12 weeks so far since I started it. So 12 weeks out of 14, where I write about 800 words a week.
And you're going to publish it?
I publish it on our website, which is fun. You know, I publish it every week, and I'm sure at some stage I'll go talk to a publisher and maybe turn it into a book.
Can I ask, who do you look up to? And because I thought it was interesting when you did your 100th podcast, I think one of the first learnings that you said was that when you meet some of these global people that you interact with in the health and well-being space, that they all don't have the full deck.
None of us do. You know, like, who do I look up to? My children, my wife, my parents. That's who I look up to. You know, I look up. I have two friends that I swim with every day, Linda and Detty, and they're both 70. And Linda and Detty, when they smile, it's like looking at God, or it's like looking at, like, it's just like, it's that. Who do I look up to? I look up to nature. I look up to soil. I look up to, like, and I know this is not the answer like that you want me to say. You want me to say, I look up to Joe Wicks. Joe's a beautiful man, and he's incredible.
I think what he's saying here is that within every person there's something to look up to. Like, there really is. Within every person is ultimately a reflection of ourselves, and we see what we're struggling with in ourselves and other people. So I think the more you can see the good in every person, well, there you can learn from everyone. Like, everyone, they don't need to be someone who's...
Typically people who are successful, they're successful at one small part of life, but if you were to look at the rest of their life, it may not be quite as successful. Like, you look at, for example, Steve Jobs, incredibly successful, what he achieved with Apple. But there was a lot of collateral damage in terms of his family, in terms of many different things. And I think success is, quote unquote, very broad, and it's, you know, there's a lot to it. And within everyone you can find things that they're incredible. But even today we were running just by Hampstead, and there was a fella collecting the bin. He said, "You're doing well, lads," and a big smile, and he looked at his watch,
and it was just like 7 a.m.
This is joy, like, and it was 7 a.m. It was like, we walked by bankers, we walked by marketers, and it was the bin person that shared the most love. And to me, that was successful. And I looked up to him at that moment and gone, how can I live my life more like him, where I can just enjoy those moments?
Our last question is usually the same one, which is what advice would you give to young Dave and young Steve?
I would say, like, we've been pretty fearless most of our life, being identical twins, because we've had unconditional support, being one egg. But I would say to myself, fear even less, because, you know, there's nothing to fear. You know, ultimately the greatest failures I've had, such as I was married and got separated and divorced, which is, you know, society will say that's a failure. But that's been one of the greatest growths I've ever had. There was so much growth and personal challenges. And ultimately, I have a wonderful relation with my ex-wife. And it's been such an enriching journey that was very challenging. So my advice to my younger self, or anyone listening, is to just, you know, fear is there and we're so aware of it. But it's how can you sit with it and be comfortable with it and ultimately let go and try to make more decisions from a place of not fear.
And I would go that we tend to celebrate, one of the fallacies of modern day life is we tend to all pursue pleasure. Pleasure and happiness typically is a negative correlation, that pleasure does not equal happiness, but satisfaction is a contributor of happiness. And you'll have experienced recently, Joe did from Santa Monica Bridge to Vegas, which is an incredible run, 500 and difficult and a bitch and hard. But at the end, because he went through that hardship, there was such euphoria and such joy, I imagine, going through it. And I think that's part of life, is that understanding that life is like night and day. Life is like summer and winter. Life is like hard and easy. And I think it's to understand that we tend to pursue pleasure and think, when I'm happy, if you ask anyone what you want for your kids, or anyone who's a parent, what you want for your kids, I want my kids to be happy. But part of happiness is being able to sit with discomfort, to sit with difficult times and understanding that they will pass, but to actually appreciate them too. And that's what I tell myself, is that life sometimes will be shit. It will be hard. It will be difficult. But like, it'll pass too, and seek support and friendship. And that's where the real magic of life is. Yeah.
We've gone way off.
No, what a fantastic way to finish the conversation.
Sit with this shit. Sit with this shit.
Personally, I've, from a distance over the years, followed you guys and learned a lot. And a lot of the stuff that you've done have been nudges in my own life. So thank you for the gift of spending the time with me today to go through these questions. I'm also aware that you've really elevated the consciousness in Ireland of people around eating, plant-based foods more than anyone else that can think of. And you've pushed it out globally. So thank you for that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mel. Enjoyed this. Sorry we went so philosophical, but I guess that's...
Couldn't help ourselves.
Yeah, that's what we enjoy.
Thanks again, guys.
Cheers,
Cheers,
Joe.
Joe.
Cheers. All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.